Hello, everyone. Today is an extremely special session. Today we have Alexis with us from Shinosis Business, and we're most fortunate. We are in the middle of 16 days of activism. This year's theme, categorized by the UN, is no excuse. And there really is no excuse to say we don't know about gender-based violence, no excuse to say we didn't know, no excuse to say we didn't check up, no excuse to say I didn't check if I'm in a relationship that's unhealthy. So absolutely no excuse. And I think today, and particularly this year, we really wanted the campaign to be centered around people. And we were so fortunate to have a GBV survivor come to us and say she was putting a program together, which you'll hear about shortly. But I think let's just start by, who is Alexis Seal?
Hi, Marina. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so honored to be able to have this conversation with you. Who am I? Sure, man, I'm just like a human. I was born and bred in Cape Town. I've had the privilege of working in a variety of organizations across financial services, which is just been such a wonderful adventure across the continent. I have two beautiful teenage daughters, aged 15 and 16. And yeah, I guess I don't know what else to add.
No, that's amazing. I think to say you're a mom already, that's a very enriching experience.
It will teach you a lot about you.
Exactly.
And life.
Exactly. So I think you approached us about this program called I Am Collective.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about it and why you felt so passionate that we needed to get the story out.
So I think when Philippa first highlighted the call to action, which was no excuse, that really, really resonated with me. Because, you know, the I Am Collective was really inspired through my own personal experience when I had what I thought was the most amazing relationship and actually turned out to be one of the most violent things that I had ever experienced. And while there was so much in that moment that was never ever my fault, I don't think anybody deserves to be hurt in any way, shape, or form. I don't think anybody deserves to be disrespected or spoken to with the use of violent language. There was also a whole bunch of things that I wasn't aware of about myself, which maybe could have put me in situations that I didn't want to be in. So luckily, I was privileged enough to have access to a whole bunch of services, right? You know, when you work in a corporation like MTN and other large corporates in South Africa, you really, really do get supported through a process like that. And yet, while I had all of this access, there was still so much that I just was blissfully unaware of. And so through my healing, I mean, this is an ongoing journey. I'm nowhere near where I think I can be. It dawned on me, well, like, oh my God, like, what if? What if this kind of healing was made available to like so many other people? Like, what if I could use my story and my own experience? Because there was women who shared their story so unselfishly that literally unlocked me. Because up until that point in time, I heard, I think it was 5 or 6 of them explaining what had happened to them. It's like they were in my house.
Sure.
Because my family had tried to get me out many, many times.
Yeah.
But I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now I know what trauma bonding is, but at that point in time, I just needed to be alive. So like, how do I go through today and not get hurt? Not, okay, what's my exit plan? That wasn't anywhere in my thinking. And when I heard
trauma bonding, just tell us a bit more. First time I'm hearing it.
Look, I mean, it's just like the cycle pattern, right? That you get stuck in, where you think things are going to be okay. There's a promise of things that's going to be okay. And then you fall back into the pattern where things are not okay. And so I think the more I got to learn these terms, the more I had language, the more I felt empowered. They say, you know, if you don't know what you're dealing with, you don't know how to get out of a situation. So I found the language really empowering, which started with this women's stories. And so, yeah, that's what the I Am Collective is about. You know, it's creating the opportunity to connect with other people who've had similar experiences so that there is no excuse. And so that you can act from a place of safety and knowledge to like go to your next, whatever your next may be for you.
Okay. And then, so what, yourself being a woman in tech.
Yeah. Yeah.
What role did that play in coming up with the solution and I Am Collective and so forth?
Oh, wow. I mean, like, I don't think if I wasn't a woman in tech, I could have come close to imagining what it is that we're building. So my role before Chinosis was in a fintech. And there we were imagining, how do you take the role of a financial advisor and model it into a conversation? Because often people don't want to speak to a broker because they always feel like they've been sold a policy and like, I don't want a policy. I just need advice. I just need to know how to navigate, like give me the information so I can feel empowered to make a decision. And it was really interesting to see how in today's terms, technology doesn't have to be like this machine that's coming at you. You can design it in a way that's so conversational, so intuitive, so guiding, so safe, especially when I'm not ready to have the conversation with someone else. So yeah. And then when I arrived at Genosis and there was just this wealth of APIs that just unlocks things you could never have imagined. It was just like a no-brainer. And so the thought of building something that could connect to people on a topic as sensitive as GBV, yeah, I mean, using technology actually excited me because the more we started talking about it as a team, the more we realized the opportunity that was in front of us to make these conversations accessible to everyone.
Yeah, it's so true. As you're speaking about fintech and financial inclusion, I remember one of the statistics was that women don't leave because of they don't have financial independence, So that's something that's so critical more and more. So tell us, I Am Collective, is it a platform that people go to? And then how are you sort of hoping that it sort of spreads further throughout the continent?
Yeah. So my background was actually in radio before I moved into financial services. And what I really learned a lot about that medium is its ability to get into one's homes and houses. I mean, often you would hear people talking at the water cooler about what they heard, the conversation they heard on air. And still today, regardless of how pervasive technology is, there's still a large percentage of people who don't have access. And so it's the most effective medium to create awareness, to say the service is available. And so when we speak of the service, the I Am Collective is really about connecting people who have been impacted by GBV, either directly or indirectly, and are choosing to want to do something about it. When we speak about the statistics, and in a South African context, it's horrific. You say things like every 26 seconds, a woman is raped. Every 3 hours, she's murdered. And those stats are actually quite disempowering. I mean, especially for me as a mom, I've got 2 teenage daughters, like from my couch. How on earth could I act when you say fight back on GBV and you show me these stats? I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And so the I Am Collective offers a pathway. It offers a mindset that says, my action says I am taking responsibility for the space that I occupy and I'm choosing to be in safe space. And what that means for me is I'm going to learn about what violent language is. I'm going to learn about what violent behavior is, and I'm going to adjust my behavior so that I don't allow it to happen in the space that I occupy, so that as a collective, we can become a safer community. Because I think that, this is a systemic hot mess, right? There are layers and layers and layers. So by no means is it a silver bullet. But surely, if we apply our mind to become a safe space, what do they say? Where attention goes, energy flows.
Yes.
It's just another way of addressing this conversation and trying to shift it in a way that's more by healing rather than it's really bad. Yes, it really is bad.
Yes, it's so true.
100%.
I think as you spoke about your daughters, I also thought of mine. I've got a 9-year-old. Her name's Isabella.
Yeah.
And I've started to sort of have conversations with her around consent, like even as she goes over to a family member's house, we're very restrictive about where we let her go and so forth. So how do you have that kind of conversations with your child? It's not necessarily, there's no way you can ever fully prevent, but how do you have those conversations to build their knowledge, their awareness themselves to try and be conscious around the people they're around? I'm sure that's probably the hardest conversation you've had to have with your own kids, just to explain everything. But then what advice would you give to both men and women having conversations and trying to think about the parameters, consent, and all of that they have with their children?
Yeah, sure. the role we play as parents is so critical. And I'm so glad that you've raised it. Because there are so many kids who actually just don't have the presence and guidance of their parents. And sometimes you just need the presence.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes your children actually know the answers. They just need for them to hold the space.
Yeah.
I spent about 2 years prototyping. I'm like just making a little bit of an anecdote to demonstrate the importance of parenthood. And I was prototyping what the AMP Collective is, and I was testing it with a variety of communities. And I spent some time in Langa, which is a township in Cape Town. And I met this amazing woman, Thandi, who had set up this wellness center in her driveway. Sure. And the purpose of the wellness center, which is adorable, was during COVID, because you could see that like people they needed just something, some way, somehow to just get it out, whatever it is. And body movement is such a beautiful way of, facilitating healing. And there was these 3 girls in her group, age 13, 15, and 16. They always carried condoms on them, and they were all on the pole for the eventuality then they will be raped. Because that is life in that township, and it broke my heart. And she said, like, how are we having conversations with our girls and our boys about what's safe and how we speak to each other. And so while I'm not a counselor, but I mean, I'm inviting parents to just have conversations. I grew up in a very, very religious home. Yeah. My mother was deeply Christian, and any question that I asked, there was 2 ways she was going to respond: by the Old Testament, by the New Testament. Sure. And while I appreciate her, and I'm a Christian and I am a believer, I think that there are so many different ways that we need to hold our children and create the space to have conversations, even if it's uncomfortable for us. Because if it's uncomfortable for us to hold the space for them, they're going to seek answers elsewhere. And we don't want our children to find answers elsewhere. So that's would be my only recommendation.
No, you're so right. We'd rather have them come to us where we may be able to be honest with them and say, okay, maybe this one I don't have an answer to. I'll find out. I'll come back to you. But, we are, as parents and the immediate community, the village and the safe space.
100%. Right? And find it together.
Yeah.
Our kids are so wise. I mean, we're living in a world that I could never have imagined when I was 15 or 16. And so they schooling me.
Yes, exactly. I got the feeling I had the same at home. Now, what's interesting is that people often speak about gender-based violence in the physical form, but obviously there's online as well, right? And we are seeing emerging technologies from AI, quantum computing, blockchain, you name it, that's occurring. We're also starting to see cyberbullying, privacy breaches, and so forth. And interesting enough, the African Union put together, a very clear policy and directive around protecting women online. What role do you see it playing, and how do you think it will evolve sort of this online space? And how do we ensure there's similar guardrails in the, let's say, physical realm as there is in the online sphere?
Sure. As soon as we try and figure something out, like something else is popping out. It's like it's evolving all the time. What's really encouraging to see is that, tech companies really are trying to establish policies, using AI to pick up on content that's inappropriate. I think already you can see when you type in certain words, you get blocked. I think in some ways, perhaps it blocks a particular narrative. And I think in a political sense, we've seen how it's being used in the negative.
Yes.
But I think the same way it's used in the negative, we can flip it, right? So if there are 1 or 2 or multiple people in a visual, like surely AI can pick up, has the individuals in this pictures consented? Are their privacy settings geared in a way that says, actually, you are allowed to forward a picture that I'm in? So I think while there are many things that are in place, there's still always an opportunity for tech companies to engage with communities and individuals, have conversations, and do a sanity check, like, are my policies being enforced correctly and doing no harm? Yes. Oh, actually, it's still doing harm. Let's dig a little deeper. So I think there's always an opportunity for us to constantly learn how things are shaping and shifting, rather just, okay, it's done, tick, and then walk away. When we walk away, we put ourselves at risk.
It's so true, but it's evolving. So we need to keep evolving because everyone always feels like you have to have all the answers at that point.
100%.
Whereas technology is shifting so much, you need to know that you have to continuously draw lessons learned, adjust as you go along.
100%. And I think that's what we're really excited about the Collective, is that it's just this ginormous focus group, really, where our information and our education is sourced from lived experiences from our community. And they were saying, this is what's happening to me now. So we can't even imagine the directions that it would go in. But I'm sure if you'd ask the question, I mean, like earlier, I would never have imagined speaking to that guy in Uganda saying, are we speaking about the men? You know what I mean? And I think that constant feedback loop that allows us to shape shifts, how we show up allows us to stay on trend and stay current and stay relevant.
Yeah. You asked about the men, right? So you and I were having this conversation before where, a colleague in Uganda approached her and just said, but what about men? But the side that we often don't speak about is what advice do we give to the men who are raising the next generation of men, And that's the tough one. I know I was on a show on Power FM this year on Women's Day, and everyone was talking about women and girls. And I was just like, no, but what about the boys? They must not be left behind in this process. And they must be, taught how to respect women, how to treat women and so forth. So I know you don't have a boy, but what guidance would you give to people out there raising boys, I know it's a tough one.
So I think, I've been spending so much time with so many amazing experts, psychologists, psychiatrists, healers from a variety of perspectives. And what's really jumped out at me, and I've heard it so many times, is that, how often do men connect their anger to unhealed trauma that's sitting within themselves? How often have they dug deeper to really, really unpeel the layers of violence that they've experienced? And my biggest takeout, like building this community, is that your entire journey starts with you. Before you can give advice or try and hold space for someone else, I mean, who's holding you? Have you dug a little deeper? Have you reflected on what you've been exposed to as a father?
Sure.
Because, what we don't heal will manifest either in our bodies or how we show up, how we reflect, how we reject, how we deflect. And so I think a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, the journey must start with you. Otherwise, we just take all of our trauma and just pass it on. That's what generational trauma is, right?
Yes, 100%.
It's just passing on without asking the question and breaking the cycle. And so, we need to hold our signs, and we do as fathers. Start by allowing and creating the space to talk about what's happened to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And feel, and be okay to feel. And give our boys permission to feel, because I think that
is...
boys don't cry. I'm glad we're living in a generation where that doesn't have to be true anymore.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think as you're speaking about the broader community, there are a lot of people around people that have had situations of gender-based violence. I'll give an example. In the family, we had a aunt who we had absolutely no idea. Imagine you're around for years and years, and a lot of people were like, I think she came much later out in public and spoke about it. And everyone started second guessing their actions to say, I could have or should have or thingy. What advice would you give to family and friends that maybe know, because there's a difference between not knowing. If you didn't know, I think you can't beat yourself up about something you never know and you never knew. But I think if you know or you see the signs and so forth, what advice would you give, and what helped you, especially during that time? I know you spoke about your family keeping on saying to you that, hey, something's not right. What helped you really during that time?
Yeah.
Or what would help others as well?
Sure. So people often speak about the intuition, like that gut sense, like where you get something in your whole body is saying like, I need to say something, I need to do something. Trust it. I have a friend whose sister was murdered and their whole family saw so much violence in that scenario. They didn't feel they had the space or it was their right to get involved in what they were observing. Now they look back and they say, we should have said something. So you don't want to be in that situation where I should have said something. If you feel like you need to say something, say something.
Mm.
I think there's so much information around us to figure out how. There's so many helplines out there. There's actually so many resources. You just need to make the choice to say, I'm going to say something. I mean, regardless of how that person's going to respond, you may not get the outcome you want. But again, it's about choice and action, right? On how we show up.
Yes.
Because if all of us chose not to ever say something, we could be in a much worse off situation, which is quite scary. And it's taking accountability for that action and always taking action because you can't be wrong. You act.
Yes, it's so true.
Right?
It's so true.
Our risk is in the inaction.
Yeah. And that's so true. Yeah. Most often, especially when you start to think of cultural norm, religion and cultural norms, it becomes a matter like that is a private family matter, that it shouldn't be discussed elsewhere. There's a process you follow. These are some of the things I've heard. There's a process you follow if there's something going on in your marriage. There's immediate family, there's elders, there's that. There's almost like, there's guardrails to the way it's kept and it's contained usually. And so I like what you said to say, okay, speak out. And it doesn't mean it doesn't have to respect culture, religion, and so forth. But I think it needs to be dealt with. But I think when you start to look at your, if you were to speak to the people who are currently in that relationship, that they've seen signs, they're getting apologies, right? Because I'm sure there's a lot of apologies in this process, right? That it will happen once, apology, happen again, apology, and a lot of apologies that end up meaning nothing, right? What advice would you give to actual people that are going through it right now?
Yeah. So whatever you're feeling in your gut again, I mean, a big part of the teachings that they took us through when we were in treatment was separating how we feel and the safety that we feel in our body and how our minds can completely override our sense of safety. And so if you think about it logically, you walk into a space and suddenly feel like, I don't feel safe. You leave, right? It's a body sense. And to trust that. And so if you're feeling that the situation is not right and you don't have the words, you actually don't need to have the words. By feeling it is confirmation that this is enough. That is enough. It is a full sentence. And then start the process of inquiry to figure out what's your next. But it starts with the intention and be okay with that intention. And journal. Journaling I found was so helpful to get what's in my head out. There are amazing helplines out there, especially if you're in a particularly violent situation that can help you from safe houses.
How do you filter through? Because there's so much out there. You can imagine in every country, whether it's in South Africa and so forth. How do you filter through, what's useful or what's the best approach for you?
Sure. Look, I guess it depends on the situation that you're in right now, right? Because I mean, the spectrum of what we're dealing with is really vast. I mean, as an example, I met with a few universities and I was speaking about students who, that's 6 for marks, where you have students feeling that I was complicit, I complied, I actually can't call this rape. But they're not seeing that the lecturers was a complete abuse of power. But even the university, so in that scenario, the universities do have pathways for students to reach out. Most countries have like national or GBV hotline numbers that can give you a steer on how to start navigating what your next steps are. If you're working in an organization, especially if it's a large corporation, 99% of the time, it's either via the medical aid or via the wellness pathway. There is a number to dial. All else fails, Google.
Yeah.
But you will find, I think the world has really rallied together to try and put structures in place to get you started. But it starts with that intention, saying, I'm going to try.
Yes. And I think, as we did 16 days of activism, one thing that was really important to us was not only to create awareness for us to speak about it, but to also ensure that the resources are easily available. So on www.mtn.com, we've put in every single country that MTN is in, you're able to see all the information, and you're able to get access to different resources. You can do a relationship test to check, could you be in an unhealthy relationship, and much, much more. So I think just to come to a close, I just want to say thank you so much. To say that you are brave is an understatement. To say that you're empowered is an understatement. You absolutely have taken this very unfortunate situation and changed it into being a light to help others and a beacon of hope. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and also for the work that you're doing. We'll continue to support. MTN stands fully behind you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.